again. Welcome to ManchTalk. I'm Tammy Simmons. I'm your host, and I'm glad you're tuning in. One of my favorite Manchester residents, because she's probably more outspoken than I am, and she lives on the west side, so she gets that for her benefit. Joining me today is Carla Garrick, who ran for Senate last year. Thank you for doing that year and year again. And Carla lives over in Ward 11, so we both have the west side in common.
We do.
This afternoon, just when we've done taping the show, I tape on Tuesdays. I always like to remind people of that. We're going to go over and help Frank. Frank, the guy who clears the walking path free of charge, is moving to an apartment, I guess, closer to the walking path.
So. Yeah, so he's moving down to one of the houses on the rail trail. Nice. He found a rental there, and it's really exciting, and I believe in the pay-it-forward voluntary model of life, so he needs some help, and he helps me every day by keeping that path clear, so we're going to go help him.
And I haven't been out on the path nearly enough as I should. That me and Dan have just gotten really fat and lazy. But
it is winter.
It is a little brisk, but I will go over and help Frank for a little bit at least to just be nice. But anyway, so I had decided, let's have somebody on so I can have a dialogue because I feel like I'm just screaming at the camera lately. So tell me, what's new in You get the actual newspaper. We're joking that you get the actual newspaper.
What's new in my world? Yeah. There's always stuff going on. I mean, something that I know that's coming up that I would think viewers should know about is we have the trial for the right to know.
Okay.
Coming up on the 25th, which is, I don't know if you followed all of this, but basically, so right to know in New Hampshire is you get to say, hey, we want to know what's going on with, our school board or whatever. Yeah. And the New Hampshire Constitution is very awesome on, saying that government should be open and accountable to the people. And so there's this Lori's list, right? Which which is basically a list. It's now called the exculpatory evidence schedule, which is just a fancy name to say these are police officers, law enforcement, who have according to the AG's office and their own departments, are people who have basically lied, beaten, or cheated. So,
so they can't be used in a court case because they've done bad.
Right. So their testimony could be exculpatory. Yes. So the AG's office is supposed to inform the defense attorney if one of these officers is on the list so that they know, hey, you might want to treat this person like a hostile witness or take it with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. So the union leader in several of the newspapers in New Hampshire actually asked to see who was on that list, which I think is a reasonable thing, in terms of open and transparent government. Right. And the AG's office, in all their wisdom, gave them the list with everything redacted. So the only thing you could tell...
Here's a piece of paper with a bunch of black lines on it.
Right! I mean, I was really shocked when I saw that. I actually asked the union leader, I was like, why don't you guys publish that in the Sunday paper?
I would have posted. Here's the list.
20 pages of just blacked out names. I feel like, any average Granite Stater should be horrified and kind of upset about this. So the union leader, some of the other newspapers, and the ACLU of New Hampshire have actually sued to try and get the names, to get an unredacted form of this information. And so that is happening, I believe, on the 25th.
Especially considering all of the people that we're talking about that are on this list are taxpayer paid. I mean, these are not private companies' employees. These are your employees and my employees that we can't find out which ones can't be trusted to be on the test. What?
And the problem is, the exception, so there's an exception in the right to know law that says personnel matters are separate.
Right.
And I think that was a mistake, in terms of where we went with that exception, because personnel matters
means everything.
Are pretty much where all the shady stuff happens, right? Because that's generally where you're we have to take action because something, untoward happened or, and so to sort of hide behind this idea.
Well, that's what happened in Salem. I mean,
right.
They had to have an audit before they found out that there was all sorts of bad things happening within the police department down there. And now somebody, I think it's the guy who got tased at the ice arena.
Right.
He, I think, is suing them. And it's not that he's suing them for tasing him. He's suing them because you covered up all sorts of stuff. You know that... Because it's all personnel.
Right.
It's personnel. private.
And you know, I think that we're at this stage where we really have to go, if we do want open and transparent government, that is the way that we hold our officials accountable.
Yep.
That
and
really
also, if it's open and fair, and if it's open and transparent, the elected officials who aren't, right now there's like this question. Everybody tends to not trust everybody. You know, you see it with the police a lot. Everybody's questions the actions of the police because of the actions of a few police.
Right. And
so this way, everybody would know that it's only this small number.
you know, and also I think, you know, to be frank, we've sort of created a culture of secrecy, and within that culture of secrecy is where bad stuff starts to happen.
Yep.
So if everyone is on board, and if everyone is actually acting as they should, then we should want this stuff to be open and transparent. I mean, there was a bill up at the State House.
I was going to say, this was the bill Mark McLean had that I couldn't understand why people wouldn't support it.
Like, I mean, I was shocked. I had gone, you know, I serve on Right to Know New Hampshire's board, and you know, so I'm interested in this as a subject, because I think that it's one of those things, like, if we actually do treat things in an open and transparent way, it's a really shortcut way to improve governance, right? So that's why I'm passionate about it. So I'd gone up to testify on Right to Know bills, and I knew about this other bill, and I hadn't really planned to testify on it. The bill basically is, it's a short bill that basically says that if a police officer discharged their weapon, killed someone, was found guilty of perjury, or has sexually assaulted someone, in that case, that personnel file can be made public so we can see it. Okay. To me, that's a no-brainer. It's a super narrowly tailored bill.
Yes. And still probably didn't do.
Was shocked that the State Troopers Association showed up and testified against it. And, you know, and he made this, like, heartfelt plea about, you know, we're all against bad cops, but. And
there's always the but, and I think.
But I was like, there should be no but there. This bill literally says, I mean, if these aren't per definition a bad cop.
Then what is?
Then what is, right?
Well, there was another bill. I talked about it on my show last week, but there was another bill last week that I was like, who doesn't vote for this stuff? Mark McLean had a bill that basically said you could sue the town or an elected official if they, you could go to the Superior Court to get an injunction against the city or town if they were wrongfully enforcing an ordinance or a rule or bylaw, or they create a rule or a bylaw or an ordinance that's unconstitutional. So it was a 3-step thing. The first one would be you had a right to a 10-day hearing at the court. Okay, that's no problem. If you were found to be correct, the town would be told, no, can't do this, or the police officer or whatever elected official or whoever, you must stop, we'll nullify the ordinance, all these things. So, okay. And the third part was, if you continue, if you knowingly, and the word knowingly was key, if you knowingly still do what the court just told you can't do, you could be sued by the person, and the town could not use their money to defend you.
Right. So
and people got up there. I sat there and listened to the testimony on the House floor, and I'm like, either people that get elected don't have simple comprehension, or they're blatantly lying, because they kept saying, well, we can't get people to volunteer for selectmen and aldermen and school committee now. This would only make it harder. And I thought, how? Knowingly. You have to knowingly, blatantly tell this court to go, whoop, screw you.
Right.
Wouldn't more people volunteer if they didn't feel like the person next to them was doing exactly what this bill would have prevented? And I'm like, nope, failed.
You know, and I think part of the problem isn't that people are malicious per se, or bad people or unethical, although I do think, you know, in many ways the structure of government just kind of breeds, it just breeds that because of power and control and all of those things. But we have to start to address these things.
Yes.
And the problem is government is too big.
Yes.
And part of the problem, and I don't just mean that as rhetoric, what I mean is it's too big. So literally no one knows what they're doing. No one knows if what they're doing is the right thing, the wrong thing. They're just sketchy in the middle.
There are state employees who are just going to work and doing their job, and their job is X, Y, and Z. because their supervisor told them that their job was X, Y, and Z. Because the supervisor told them that their job was X, Y, and Z. And they're just going along doing
and
the thing.
maybe that piece of information is, 25 years old, and everyone's, it's like cutting off the end of the pot roast, right? To put it in the oven. And it's like, why are we doing this?
Because somebody did it.
Because the pan was too small 100 years ago.
Right.
And so part of the problem, I think, is just let's create an environment by shrinking government where people don't have to be scared. And then let's also elect people who think that people should be able to know. Why aren't we as transparent as possible?
Right.
I would rather see everyone inundated with too much information.
Right.
Like, just give me everything,
Yep.
and that way people who are really passionate about, little itty budget items and whatever can,
maybe
go look it up.
Maybe if we had more information. I mean, I know Manchester a few years back was supposed to make it so that we could see disbursements, I think, on their website. And quite honestly, I figure if I don't know where that is, nobody else knows where that is, right? But I mean, why can't I? Why can't I just go click on Manchester website and just see where all the checks were cut last month?
Right.
All of them.
Yep. Because that information exists in a spreadsheet somewhere.
I mean,
try
to get any information where you're like, I mean, the union leader used to post the salaries of the city employees. Yep. Okay.
They do that every 2 years or so.
But it's like, but why shouldn't I just be able to go out to the, what's the secret?
Right.
Why does anybody care if I know how much somebody makes?
Quite frankly, I think part of the secret, and this is something people don't want to talk about, is, people want to say, our state's employees are underpaid.
Until they see the list. And
until you actually see what people make. It's really easy to go, a starting salary is X.
I will tell
But the question is, what is the second year salary, or the third year, or the 10 year? Because they're usually 50% higher.
Dan just yesterday morning says, "Hey, they're looking for a systems administrator at I forget what department in the state." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I don't know if that's going to work." But I said, "I'm curious." So he said what the salary range was, and it was broad. It was like a $60,000 range, which I thought was pretty broad for a system administrator job. And I'm thinking, well, is that because if you're already a state employee and you're this many steps up, you get paid the high system administrator, or are we looking at skills? And it was not below the market. I will tell you that. Yep. I know what system administrators make and can make. This was very much in the realm of what the private sector is paying.
And you know what? And quite frankly, I'm like, we can have that debate whether, state employees should earn less than market value.
Right.
But please stop pretending like you're not getting well compensated, because that is nonsense.
Where I ran into him and he was talking.
And don't forget the bennies.
That's what he was talking about. He worked for the city. Gosh, I can't remember where I ran into him. And he said, well, it was at the gun show. He goes, I work for the city, and the disparity between what we earn compared to the private sector. And this person worked in a job that I thought, I don't even know where you would work in the private sector, so it's hard to really compare. Right. It's not like you're a teacher versus a private school teacher, or a lawyer versus a private lawyer. So he said, but the disparity is growing. The difference. And I said, yes, but so is the disparity in the benefits. And he kind of looked at me like he'd never heard that before. I said, you have far better benefits than anybody in the private sector has. And that disparity is also growing. So while you are looking at only one half of it saying, well, I could make more money. Yes, you could make more money, but you're not going to have a guaranteed pension. You're not going to have the health insurance. And right away he said, well, our health insurance has gotten more expensive. I said, and nowhere's near as expensive as mine.
Right.
Nowhere's near.
And, and I was up at the State House, actually on the education scholarship account, right, which we can talk about a little bit. but just, in keeping with this, there was a, I'm not sure if he was the headmaster, but there was someone from I think it was the Christian Academy or something.
Concord Christian or something.
Yeah, and he said, their teachers get paid $18,000 a year. And I actually heard some gasps from, from public sector teachers, and I was like, yeah, you see, that's something people need to understand.
Right.
It's some people are willing to work for less in the private sector, not to deal with the red tape.
Well, that's like, I noticed that this week in Concord, they have 3 bills on the minimum wage. And then I saw an article that somebody posted on Facebook about Massachusetts, and they want to increase their minimum wage. And beyond just the regular minimum wage, which, quite honestly, I saw a statistic, which I don't doubt the validity of, that says there's probably 500 people now in the state of New Hampshire who get paid $7.25 an hour. And I will guess that they are all 15 and 16 years old or working part-time or in a very seasonal job or something. The number has with our economy and our jobs, it has just dropped significantly. I mean, Target pays kids, 15, 16-year-olds, $12 an hour. So if you're making $7.25 an hour, you probably need to get a different job. But what bothers me the most about the minimum wage bills, beside the fact that they're mandating something that, should the economy not be doing as well, will harm people in New Hampshire, but they want to increase the percentage that tipped employees make. And there's this big fallacy out there that people who serve, the servers in restaurants and bartenders, are woefully underpaid because they have to only be paid, I think it's 45% of the $7.25 minimum wage. The problem is that's only the portion that the employer has to pay. And if their tips do not exceed $7.25 an hour, which they will, the employer would still have to pay them $7.25 an hour. But the reality is that wait staff in New Hampshire make $15, $20 or more an hour everywhere. That's just the norm. There's a reason people take waitressing and waiting jobs, because it pays well. They're not easy jobs, but they pay well. And the harder you work and the better you are at it, the more you work. And there was this debate, and I just don't understand if people get the concept of how math works. If you take a burger at a restaurant and it's $12.99 now, when that restaurant owner has to write a check for $4.25 an hour or whatever it is, and you make him instead have to write a check for $12 an hour for every server in their restaurant, he has to raise the cost of that $12.99 burger, and not just $1. That burger's now going to be $19. So the person who we're trying to help no longer can afford the burger. Nor can I afford the burger. So guess what? Now the server...
Now we're selling less burgers, so now people are losing their jobs.
They're going to lose their jobs, and the burgers are going to go up to $24 an hour, and then the restaurant's going to close.
And if this sounds like we're just making stuff up, this happened in Seattle where they made it $15 an hour.
Two restaurants in New Hampshire, it happened. They did that $15 an hour, no tipping thing. They're both closed.
Yep.
Because it doesn't make sense. Any server who is limited to earning $15 an hour is not going to do that job.
But Tammy, don't let economics get in the way of don't let reality get in the way of a good narrative. Because I mean, we're seeing this from the left, this Green New Deal.
Yeah.
I mean,
that was totally crazy. I'm sorry.
I mean, can you just the one sentence was, and then we'll just retrofit all buildings in America to make them green.
Yes.
And I was like, Did you just
say that? Did you really just mean? Maybe you didn't actually mean all buildings in 10 years.
Oh yeah, I mean.
So I get a new house. There was just so much crazy, and I get that maybe that was. I think it's not true that it was not what was intended to go out. I think that was what was intended to go out, and then there was.
I think they're just.
And then the Democrats were like, "Whoa, you better roll that back a bit because that's crazy sounding." Because even the Democrats were like, "This is kind of crazy sounding," but.
Bernie Sanders announced today he's running again 2020, and it was like he's almost starting to sound like the not
crazy, totally
crazy. Which is scary because maybe that's part of the
I watched an interesting article on YouTube because we don't have cable anymore, so I was watching. I didn't realize that the owner of Starbucks was considering running as an independent, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." So I'm listening to it, and it's this weird. They can't figure out what to do with it because the left loves Starbucks because the Starbucks used to be a social justice warrior, which really isn't anymore. So they really would like that. But he also thinks their policies are nuts.
Right.
So now they're like, oh, he's bad. So you watch, I mark my words, they are going to go after Starbucks full blown.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to be the evil guy because they worry that he's going to be the Ross Perot.
Yes.
That's going to on their end.
Yes.
And they don't want Trump again. Okay. Then put up somebody who can engage with somebody like Schultz, who maybe might give somebody an alternative. Don't go after Crazy Land.
And honestly, I mean, he doesn't. I did not realize this. Someone did point it out to me that he's anti-gun. Schultz, right? So Starbucks banned guns. Yeah. So that was disappointing. Yeah. But in terms of his economic policies, he looks pretty moderate and reasonable and free market. I read
yesterday was
American.
What's her name? So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the star of the Democratic Party. So, Amazon pulled out of New York. Okay. I looked at it and I'm like, oh, that's terrible. Poor New York. And she was really adamant that they should take that $3 million in tax credit that they were going to give
and I think
Amazon.
That might have been a billion, by the way.
It They should take that $3 billion that New York would have gotten after Amazon paid $27 billion in taxes. So they were going to say the 28th, the 29th, and 30th billion you're going to pay in taxes. You won't.
Right.
She thinks we should take that money and spend it on subways and hiring out more teachers, and I forget what the third one was. And even the Democratic mayor of New York was like, that's not how this works. There is no
there is no
that money doesn't exist because they're not coming now.
Right.
And I'm thinking, this is the problem. We've got people who think, same problem we're having with people with their tax refunds. They think because they got more money all year long, and now we're not getting as much money now.
Now they're being
screwed. Right. And I'm like, okay, but how much did you pay in taxes? Well, I don't know.
Well, but your withholdings were less, which meant you had more money every month, which is better because that means the money stayed in your pocket instead of Uncle Sam's pocket. And
but people have become conditioned to not.
But it's not just conditioning. I mean, people are being mal-educated in schools. Yep. I mean, this is planned, in my opinion, right? I'm like, why don't we learn basic economics? How to balance a checkbook?
Basic stuff. Like there was an article about white privilege, and they're teaching white privilege classes so that we can better understand whatever it is that white privilege is. And I'm like, why are we teaching that in public schools? Shouldn't we be just teaching? Can we teach checkbooks? How about we start with checkbooks?
Well, or just let's,
economics. Why it is that you should not take out a student loan for hundreds of thousands of dollars if the job that you're hoping to get with that piece of paper is only going to pay $30,000 a year. There's a formula. Right. X equals this, Y equals this. Those do not equal.
Yep. But there's some exciting stuff that's happening in New Hampshire with education. Did you read about these? It's like
outside learning wherever, learn anywhere or something. Yeah, it's funny. I don't really think that's that new. I saw that Fred Romani was in front of the Board of Education. He used to be the Commissioner of Education, if I'm not mistaken, and probably at least 10 years, maybe 15 years ago, he spoke at a dinner that I organized. And back then he was saying, why are we limiting learning to a building? If you go to France to visit your aunt over the summer and you learn to speak French, why should you have to come and sit in a classroom and learn French in order to get credit for it? Right. If you can actually speak French. If you can show, I have learned to speak French. I can take the test and I can do it.
Right.
But that's not how we do it. And if you want to take gymnastics, should you still have to take gym class?
And so, I mean, I think it's, so even if it's not new, maybe they're
trying to... No, but it's nice that it's coming back up.
But I think it's nice that it's coming back up, and it seems like a healthy compromise. Yep. On the one hand, we have people who are entirely against school choice, which just, quite frankly, like...
It's disturbing.
Flummoxes me, because it seems like the left is pro-choice on
everything,
certain things, but not on other things. And then, the question has to be asked, what's the motivation, right? Well. And so with this, what's really great about it, and I was like, I'm going to go do research. Yeah. I teach writing. I have some papers that say I can do awesome things. Yeah. And I was like, what can I teach people? Right. Like, maybe I could start a little workshop. Yeah. So I hope a lot of people start to go, maybe, I have talent in this, or, elderly people who are like, oh, I could teach some kind of interesting
somebody
sewing
in Indiana
or
doing it on their screen.
Well,
and that's what it is. Education has to be about children and education, not about a building.
Right.
And
it's not about schooling. It's about learning, right? It's not about, this, as you said, this
it's
building.
Not about the building.
It's about our kids learning stuff? Like, are they,
and yet we have people who can't understand their tax refund.
Yeah, but
because we aren't learning them.
No, but I mean, like when I taught in New York before I moved here, I mean, I taught English composition, and I mean, the kids in college there, who probably all had $40,000 a year student loans, I mean, could not really read and write. And
they're
in college with debt. I mean, this entire
they're
model.
having to go back and pay for remedial courses to catch them up to where they should have been in the first place.
But you know what, Tammy? You can't catch those people up. You can't, like, be in college with,
and not be able to have be able to read. You have to be able to read.
And not only read, but comprehend, right? Because, yes, maybe you could read the words, but it's like, what does this mean? Like, what, critical thinking, history.
Yep.
I mean, people want to bash white privilege, but it's like, there's history there. That's Western civilization. Right. Yes, mistakes were made, but let's learn out of that. Right. Let's not throw everything out.
Right. You can't just make believe history didn't happen.
Right.
And thank you, Republicans, for ending slavery. Just saying.
Yes.
In case I don't say that enough. See, we should do this more often. Isn't this more fun seeing the two of us? I think we should. We should, because we both have a lot of opinions on a lot of similar opinions, not always, but we both tend to pick up on different pieces of the same type of subject matter. So I like it.
I know you had a bunch of stuff. Well, sorry, I just sidelined you.
I did. No, it's fine. I only got a couple minutes, but I'm trying to get in the habit of sharing the votes from the State House for the Manchester representatives so that people in Manchester know what their representatives are voting on. Last week, like the bill I mentioned earlier about not being able to hold elected officials accountable, that one failed, and it was pretty much, all the Democrats voted against it and all the Republicans voted for it. There were bills to say that an employer can't ask what your prior salaries was on a job application, can't ask about if you've committed a crime, a felony and been convicted, can't ask about that on a job application. Things that, if you really think them through, what's the point of that? Who is that actually helping? The statistics in New Jersey and New York show that since they've implemented that check-the-box legislation saying you can't ask about criminal history, it's actually hurt minorities because, for whatever reason, people aren't willing to take the chance on somebody they don't know enough about beforehand, so they just don't call them.
And so, frankly, just another example of unintended consequences. That's right. And that's pretty much, I think, in some ways, in a nutshell, where government is at this stage. It's just spinning its wheels of unintended consequences. Everything it's trying to fix, it's making it worse. Let's make it smaller. Right. Let's put power in the hands of people.
Smaller, cleaner. Greener.
Smaller,
cleaner, greener. Let's do that with government. Anyways, so that's about all the time we have. That goes so fast. Wow. We got about a minute. I'm sure I can convince Carla to come on again. If you ever want to hear about a specific issue, or if one of us brought something up and you'd like to hear us talk more about it, or you have any questions, we can I'm glad to return any emails. You can email me at ManchTalk@gmail.com. I have a Facebook page where I try to share these shows weekly. I don't always do a very good job at it, but
we're going to do better.
We're doing better. 2019, my goal was to try to do better on the show. And I promise I will actually tape from a kayak in the middle of the river at least once this year. Maybe Carla will be in the other kayak taping me.
I could do that. We could do it if Lou's canoe tax passes.
That's right. Don't even get me going. Or maybe he can get casinos. Not so much this with his monopolies, but that's another day's discussion. It's cold, but winter's getting over. We're past the halfway point in the month that shall remain nameless in my house. Manchester Republican Committee meets tomorrow night. You won't be seeing this, but you can always go on to manchestergop.com and see when our monthly meetings. We meet on the third Wednesday of the month at Murphy's Tap Room at 6 p.m., and we'd love to see some good new faces. That's all I got. Thank you, Carla.
Thanks, Tammy.
And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Peace out.